This is probably one of the most important times in the history of an empire. And it's my considered opinion that the destruction of cultures, the destruction of habitats, the destruction of the land, its animals, and everything at the hand of the human is an atrocity. But on the other hand, the planet always wins. I did my first sculpture at the age of 29 at my kitchen table with a Japanese steak knife and a piece of sandpaper. It was admired by a beat poet, Daniel Langton, and I gave it to him. I was very close to a group of flamenco dancers and musicians and cantars in the late 50s, and one of them told me that he lived next door to a wood sculptor by the name of Richard Whalen. He arranged for me to meet Richard Whalen, which I did, and who befriended me and taught me all of the skills for wood carving that I would need to know. I did this on my lunch hour since I was working in the financial district, dealing in the coffee business. So I would come on my lunch hour for about a year, put on an apron over my three-piece suit, and carve with Richard. In his garden, he carved outside. And so it was a great experience. After I made 6 pieces, I put the 6 pieces in my truck and I drove them to the Palace of the Legion of Honor. They gave me a one-man show in 1961. In those days, museums sold the artist's work, took no commission, and gave all the money to the artist. And I sold out, which was a very, I would say, encouraging thing. And from there, I had a lot of shows. My early work, of course, in the 60s was lyrical. It depended on form, and it depended on line, and it depended on mythology and birds and female nudes, and it's kind of the ordinary stuff, and they were all made out of wood until Peter Voulkos made a foundry, a makeshift foundry in his studio in Berkeley. He and I became friends, and he said he was going to build a foundry, and I said, well, let's see if we can cast some of this stuff over here, and we did. So I just sculpted for myself, made sure I did about a piece a year to keep my hand in it. In 1988, I decided to take up my art again. Only the vision had changed. I started doing a few sacred objects, and then I did them in wood, and then I had them cast in bronze, and the results were cool. Did a few more of those, one in stone. I started thinking about oil and our dependence on it. This is the raven skull that I did after the Exxon Valdez oil spill. And the patina I put it on it is a translucent sort of oil color, which is not one of the oil-covered birds, but it is one of the two clans of the Quackayutls and the Haida Northwest Coast Indian tribes, and that's where it happened. That's kind of what it looks like, if you look at it. I did a human skull with a giant oil drop on its head and its scream, the negative inverse of the oil drop. And this began a whole series of thinking about man's carelessness and greed and self-centeredness. So I began to think of each of the major problems that I could address through my sculpture. The environmental degradation, war, man's aggressive nature, which has to do with corporations like Disney and McDonald's and Marlboros and crap like that. Cloning, I've done a sculpture of the cloning of the first mammal, Dolly the sheep, as head mask on a Frankenstein skull with a bolt through his neck and a DNA scarification. And I just did one of the first human, and the patina was done on the day they announced that 3 human embryos had been cloned. You really have to be patient to do reductive sculpture. I mean, you're starting with a block, and you got to visualize what's inside the block. And you have to visualize what it's going to look like from 360 degrees. And you have to visualize what it's going to look like for every 360 degrees from the top and, you know, whatever. So unlike painting, which is on a flat surface, and you try to create the illusion of another dimension, this stuff has to work all the way around. So that's what I have the most fun with.